Sunday morning. What's going on in the world? Well, with us today is General David Petraeus. Well, four-star general, head of the CIA. There's nobody better to talk to on a Sunday morning and know what the heck is going on than the general. Well, General Petraeus, give the American people an update.
Well, perhaps we could start with the memorandum of understanding between the U.S. and Iran, which was a potentially significant tactical achievement, but seems to have increasingly uncertain strategic prospects. The MOU did halt the fighting, largely reopened the strait, created diplomatic space, but recent Iranian statements concerning their authority over transit through the strait, together with other actions, often, in fact, contradicting what it is that President Trump or our negotiators announced after one of the sessions together. All of this gives, I think, considerable pause. There are several realities that are becoming clear. First, the most consequential issues remain unresolved. They include short and long-term control over the strait. The IRGC says, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps says, we have no involvement in this whatsoever, despite establishing a contact group between Iran and the U.S. to facilitate the freedom of navigation. The Iran nuclear program, including enrichment limits, verification, and inspections. One of the early achievements was that the Iranians were going to allow the International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors to return. That was then denied later on. What do we do about sanctions relief, frozen assets, the missile and drone programs, and Iran's support for destabilizing regional proxies? We should be very clear, second, that implementation, not announcement now, is going to determine success. And every subsequent Iranian action should be judged against the agreement's objective of reducing tensions and restoring freedom of navigation. So we should have pretty disciplined realism about this. It should be judged neither by hopes invested in it or skepticism surrounding it as well, but by Iran's actions in the weeks and months ahead. And so far, those have been a bit concerning, more than a bit.
Understood. And there's several sides in Iran. Who's really in charge? Who's calling the shots? And I tried to calm people down because I guess that one attack that happened last week on a cargo vessel, it wasn't authorized by anybody. It looked like it was coming from a single entity.
Well, more recently, just in the last 24 hours, there were apparently 4 drones launched against vessels. 3 of them were knocked down, 1 hit, and that's sort of frozen all the energy and activity around the clearing out of the vessels inside the Gulf and even replacing their crews who have been stuck on board there for a number of months. The fact is that it appears there is a tug of war inside Tehran between the new supreme leader and the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps on the one hand, very hard line, and then the president and the negotiating team, which appear to be making agreements in the consultations and negotiations, which then in a number of cases have been then rejected or contradicted by statements by the IRGC. So this is difficult. These are tough negotiations to begin with, but it's even tougher if the negotiators can't count on support back in their home country capital.
And so, how many people have to agree? Is it the I guess the mullahs and the army and the Iranian Guard?
Well, it's the Islamic Revolutionary Guards. That is, of course, the regime protection force. It has its own Army, Navy, Air Force, in addition to the normal Army, Navy, Air Force, the Artesh. They appear to be the leader of the IRGC, and the new supreme leader, who has always been close to the IRGC, appear to be having linked arms. And then, again, the president and the negotiators and Speaker of the Parliament seem to be a bit more on the moderate side, noting that they're all hard lines, so this is all relatively speaking. And that's difficult. And I can only imagine the frustrations on the part of President Trump and of his negotiators.
Now, in addition, Lebanon and Hezbollah, what the heck is going on there? I mean, it seems like the Israelis had them surrounded for a while, and I think the president asked them to stand down a little bit.
Well, what's happened is that, keep in mind, this all began when Hezbollah very, very substantially attacked Israel some months back. Israel responded, and this time Israel's gone into Lebanon and taken control of some of the territory from which Hezbollah has been shooting at the villages and towns in northern Israel, many of which have had to be evacuated yet again, as they were in the months after the 10/7 attacks. And so they're trying to push them back to get the Lebanese army to come in and occupy those areas to keep Hezbollah from being able to return to them. And now the Iranians want to use the memorandum of understanding to lever us, to lean on the Israelis and say, well, stop shooting at these guys. Even if they shoot at you, have some restraint because it's undermining the possibilities of the negotiations. I think the president has been fairly judicious in doing that. But this is putting Israel in a very, very difficult situation. They've not achieved the objectives they set out to attain when they launched these operations into Lebanon, into Hezbollah-controlled territory. The Lebanese military is not capable of disarming Hezbollah, despite agreements between the Lebanese government and Israel, historic in that regard, but there are just limits to how much the Lebanese military can do. And Israel gets shot at, they should respond, but now you have this additional factor that could undermine the negotiations in the wake of the Memorandum of Understanding, which some people have actually labeled the Memorandum of Misunderstanding, because it appears that the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps is interpreting it very differently from the way it was interpreted by the U.S. negotiators when it was reached.
Understood. Russia and Ukraine, is there any hope there for peace?
Very much. Yes, very, very much so, John. Ukraine is on the verge of being isolating the Crimean Peninsula, the occupied by Russia Crimean Peninsula, to the extent that there has been a declaration of emergency for the entire peninsula. So the summer tourisms are all trying to get back to Russia. The beaches are going to be emptied. Essentially, Ukraine is taking apart the Russian oil storage facilities and refineries in Crimea, to be sure, but also the refined products going into Crimea. There's limited ways in. You can either take a ferry. They've knocked out 3 of the ferries recently. The Kerch Strait Bridge, the pride of Putin, which has a railroad, that's not operating anymore, but the roads, and they now can hit that. And so there were such long gas lines in Crimea that the government there won't even sell gas to civilians. So you can see the extent to which this is, again, isolating Crimea. Then the route that comes in from southern Ukraine, you can go from the Russian Federation across the occupied southeastern part of Ukraine and then down into Crimea from the north. They've knocked out the bridges there, the roads, even the the pontoon bridges the Russians have built. And they also, as you may recall, in the past week or so, hit the Moscow refinery. It is offline, huge plumes of smoke and flames. And there are gas lines as far east in the Federation as Siberia. So they are really taking the fight to the Federation. They're going after the air and ballistic missile defenses, which prevented them from doing that before. Now Moscow is beginning to pull some of those defenses from the front lines and other areas to Moscow so they can keep the capital freer of this kind of activity. And yet Ukraine is going after. And now they're starting to isolate the front lines to a degree as well. They've developed longer range Ukrainian drones that can get into the rear areas where you have the logistical bases and so forth. And those are no longer safe for Russian vehicles and headquarters and depots. So this is quite a significant development. Also an announcement that the Ukrainians killed or seriously wounded, 31,500 Russians in the past month. So
that is serious
you can
stuff.
all start to see, it's very serious stuff, and you can start to see that when the U.S. reimposes the sanctions on Russia's sale of oil, which we lifted because of concerns about Brent crude, because of the Strait of Hormuz being blocked for so long. And then if we could ever do the package of sanctions in the Senate, supported reportedly by 90 out of 100 senators, we could really do enormous damage to the Russian economy, the war economy, which has already sustained enormous damage by repeated rounds of EU sanctions, at the same time that the EU is in the midst of providing the early tranches of 90 billion euros of financial and economic assistance. That is an enormous lifeline to Ukraine. So a lot of really positive developments in terms of perhaps offering the possibility that Vladimir Putin might actually have to seek a cessation of hostilities, perhaps as much as does Ukraine. So we have to see how this evolves in the months ahead, whether Ukraine can just continue the pressure so that Russia cannot get back on its feet in terms of air and ballistic missile defenses, which are right now depleted enough that Ukraine is having this enormous impact deep into the Russian Federation and, again, isolating the Crimean Peninsula. And perhaps they have to start withdrawing elements from locations where they just no longer can sustain them. So, again, quite a very important development. We need to be careful, as always, because the Ukrainians on their side have an Achilles heel when it comes to ballistic missile defense, especially getting the missile interceptors, because, of course, of the heavy usage of them in the conflict with Iran. And also, Russia is now starting to manufacture jet-powered Shahed drones, which makes it more difficult for the piston-driven Ukrainian drone interceptors to be as effective as they have been, knocking down over 90% of those drones.
General David Petraeus, thank you for the update for all the American people, and you really provide a great service, and thank you for everything you've done for our country and continue to do for our country.
A privilege, Sean. Thanks. Always great to be with you.
Thank you so much.